Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's Nutanix event. My name is Scott Lowe. I'm the CEO of Actual Tech Media, and I'm thrilled to be your host for today's event. Entitled Transformation in a Time of Adversity, this event will take you on a journey of discovery to help you identify solutions to help you adapt to a changing world. Before we get started with our great presentations, we have some housekeeping items we would like to share with you. First, if you have a question, please ask. There's a questions button on your screen that you should use to ask any question that you may have about any of the topics that come up during today's event. Some questions will be brought forward live to be answered during the event. Number two, there are a number of handouts that are available in the Handouts pane in your control panel. Just click the Handouts button to download these informational assets to get even more information about the content that's being shared today. During today's event, we'll be giving away 2 LEGO Star Wars Imperial Star Destroyer LEGO sets. These are the big ones, folks, so please make sure you have the time and the space to build them if you win. In order to win prizes, you must be present on the live event, and we'll choose 2 people at random to be the lucky winners of the LEGO sets. If you are selected as a winner and you would rather have Actual Tech Media make a donation in your name to Direct Relief, we will do so. Direct Relief is on the front lines of helping fight the coronavirus battle that we're all facing right now. If you are a winner and you choose to take the LEGO set, you must submit a W-9 form for tax purposes. The IRS always wants their cut. And for full prize details, please visit the link you see on your screen. If you'd like to participate in today's event on social media, please use the hashtag #NTNXForce and follow Nutanix for more information about what Nutanix is doing. And I'd love it if you would follow Actual Tech Media and me as well. We're always providing new and great information to our audience. Thank you again for joining us today, and now let's get on with the presentations. Welcome to our keynote presentation entitled Transforming IT to Enable Business Revolution. During this presentation, we're going to answer 3 critical questions that you need to ponder as you move your organization forward. The first one is, how did we get to where we are in IT today? Really, understanding the past is the key to understanding the future, and this is a question we have to answer. Next, what key technologies and services have risen above the rest and require attention from CIOs and IT professionals? There have been a number of technologies that have entered the market in recent years and the recent decade, and these are all really important technologies to understand, but not all of them are as critical as the others. We're going to talk about some of the key things that have entered the market in recent years that are important for you to look at. And we're also going to talk about the question around how IT can take a platform-centric approach. Basically, how does such an approach help support emerging needs while also keeping control of cost and complexity? Now, sometimes it may seem hard to do both of those things at the same time, but with the right approach, it actually is possible. Because of what's happening around us right now, but also because of what's happening in the wider world where digital transformation initiatives abound, IT now has a mandate, not just an opportunity, to transform the organization and the customer experience. I think this is something that we all, as IT leaders and professionals, need to embrace. We have a new lease on life that we may not have had for recent years. In a lot of cases, we may just have been seen as cost centers. But we have an opportunity now to really do something different, but we have to know how to do that. But how did we get to where we are now? Well, there's a whole lot of focus on legacy data center elements, legacy IT, and the like. In some of the consulting work I do, I still see CIOs that are in the data center doing things. We don't want to see that. We want a focus on something different. We don't want to focus on data center activities. We want to focus on a new way of doing business. We've also seen an ad hoc implementation of cloud services. Now, the focus on legacy data center elements has introduced complexity that's hard to overcome, but ad hoc implementation of cloud services has made it even worse. There are a number of stories of organizations that have moved back to on-premises environments because their cloud plans did not pan out. And that's because of poor planning, or they just didn't know what they didn't know. And they did things in an ad hoc way, and it didn't quite work out the way they anticipated. there's often too little focus on the customer journey and the customer experience. And in this context, customer could be an internal customer like an end user, or it could be a customer of the organization. But IT has really been inwardly focused in a lot of ways, or just focused on the internal customer and not enough on the external customer. And these things are facets that have gotten us to a point where we are today and that we need to be rethinking. And here's one that's never fun to hear, but we have to rethink about robust IT governance and the robust IT governance strategy. IT governance is more important than it's ever been. And it's not the most exciting thing to work on, but it's critically important. And I'll be talking more about that shortly. And the other piece of this is failure to maintain knowledge of current market opportunities. This is important. We have to have understanding of what's available around us. We have to keep up all the time, which means we have to go to events like this. We have to attend webinars. We've got to read content. As IT decision makers and IT professionals, maintaining an understanding of what's happening in the market around us is really important because our organizations are looking to us to help them make sense of what's happening out there. So what's the result of everything I just talked about? Well, first of all, we have silos of infrastructure. So we've got a storage silo here to do this application. We've got another storage silo here to handle this application. We may have a single hyper-converged set of nodes to do this application. We may have cloud to do this. We have these silos, and worse, they're not always integrated. So there may be poor or incomplete integration between these infrastructure silos, which means we're managing them all separately. We're trying to do something with them all, but it's really hard to do. It's sort of a maze of complexity that we don't want to have to deal with. And worse, it's inflexible. Our businesses are changing around us all the time, but our IT environments aren't always as flexible as they need to be to support that constant change that's happening in the business. And because of the IT governance issue that I talked about earlier, we often have a series of shadow IT environments that have been installed throughout the organization. And this can be everything from people keeping different sets of data for their own use to people deploying entire cloud systems because a business unit needs it. Well, the problem we have with shadow IT is not necessarily that we don't want to be the arbiters of all things technology, but that we need technology that works for the organization and meets all of the needs of the organization. And I want to say a key phrase that meets all of the agreed upon needs of the organization. And that's where governance comes in. When we start seeing shadow IT out there, we start seeing inconsistent sets of data. And I've seen this in my own consulting work, where we walk around an organization and everybody's reporting different numbers for the same metric. And the reason it's happening is because we don't have a comprehensive data strategy that's part of an overall data governance, which is part of IT governance system in place. So people are just doing their own thing. And when we start seeing a lot of shadow IT, we start to get concerned around security. We start to get concerned around total cost of ownership. And there's a lot of potential challenges that get introduced because of the way the shadow IT is exhibited throughout the organization. And it's not that we want to stamp it out. In fact, we want to embrace shadow IT, but we have to do so in the context of good governance. All of this results in dissatisfied customers. If you've got a lot of shadow IT, it's because IT is not doing something that the organization may need. And your customers of your organization may be impacted as well. And we want to fix those sorts of situations. We also end up with complex IT operations. So if we have too many silos, there's a lot of complexity there, especially if they're not well integrated. But even integration itself with lots of different silos can be really complex. And as we enter eras where things are supposed to be simple, we want simple to manage IT systems as well. And all of this leads to a high total cost of ownership. Even if it's not a direct dollars and cents cost of ownership, we may have to have lots of staff. We may be losing on market opportunities because of inflexible systems or shadow IT or complexity. But all of that results in a high total cost of ownership for the environment. What's needed is a rethinking of IT. The old ways of thinking that worked for a long time don't work anymore. This idea of just buying servers and storage and the simple days, the good old days of IT are gone. Now, some people think of those as the good old days, but I actually am really excited about what IT can do in the future. I love this idea that IT can help organizations wrangle really complex digital transformation initiatives. Now, that phrase digital transformation is used a lot, and it's kind of overused, but It's really important. And this is where we link IT and the business in an inextricable way. And it's something that organizations really struggle with. Most digital transformation projects fail. And I'll talk about why they fail later on in this presentation. But IT the leaders and decision makers are really needing to focus on these initiatives for their businesses as they move forward. A rethought IT organization has robust governance strategies in which all stakeholders have a voice. So we embrace governance and we try to bring all of these former shadow IT functions that are necessary into a supported framework by central IT or by the IT organization. This doesn't mean we bring all of the shadow IT function into a new paradigm. But what happens is we create a governance structure, and then we apply that governance structure to all the shadow IT systems that are out in the organization. And the ones that meet the requirements for the governance process get carried into a supported framework. And that's really important because there was a business need at some point for someone for a lot of these shadow IT functions. Those don't just go away because IT says they don't want to support shadow IT. As a CIO myself, I would not be all that interested in going out in the organization and saying, all shadow IT must stop. We have to find out the why behind those shadow IT initiatives so that we can support the ones that are necessary for the success of the organization. All of this requires new thinking, new skills, and new IT systems. And we'll be talking about an option for those IT systems later on in this presentation. One of the things that's really important to understand is that the role of IT is changing a bit. Now, no one's ever outside the IT function has really been all that interested in the servers and the storage and the network and all that stuff. But the term invisible infrastructure isn't just a marketing jargon. I mean, we use that phrase because we want IT to be invisible. But what that really means is we don't want IT to be the hindrance. A lot of the inflexibility we see in modern IT systems or legacy IT systems, rather, has resulted in businesses not being able to execute on their strategy. We want that to be a non-issue. We want a platform that allows the business to move forward without IT getting in the way. That means that IT needs to consider a platform approach to the future. And that's a very different way of thinking about IT than we have in the past. So as we think about some of the technologies that are associated with the modern era, as much as the cloud has risen in prominence, on-premises systems remain incredibly important to organizations. And in these systems, we need scalable storage. And that storage has to be a variety of types. We still need block and file and object storage because different applications have different needs. And we're still going to be running applications on-premises for the rest of my life, if not the rest of the lives of everyone watching this presentation right now. We have to have scalable compute, but we also have to have an on-premises environment that supports robust end-user computing technologies. In recent years, we've seen the rise of edge computing, and this is a new term that is used to encompass what used to be called remote office and branch office scenarios, autonomous computing at things like oil and gas rigs, in autonomous vehicles. But all of those locations will come together to form the edge. And here we have a combination of need around general purpose applications as well as specialized applications. And if we think about a retail store, general purpose applications could be the time clock or surveillance systems, whereas those more specialized applications like artificial intelligence and machine learning based workloads are consuming and analyzing and crunching data that comes from a series of Internet of Things devices like cameras and sensors and everything else, and then doing something with that for the business. Then we have the cloud. Now, in the cloud, we have a little bit of everything. We have general purpose workloads, we have specialized workloads, we have software as a service, but we also have artificial intelligence and machine learning workloads running there that are often still connected to our edge environments, so we're working on them in a hybrid type scenario. But we also now have a lot of end user computing happening in the cloud, and we'll be talking more about that later on. But the current challenge we have with cloud is a need to maintain cost control and robust governance in cloud scenarios. Then we have all of our various application spaces, and this is Not a different location, but it's a different aspect of the modern era that we need to think about. Applications and workloads are where the magic happens. But we want these things to be less complex, particularly around databases. If you think about all of your applications, the database environment is at the heart of them. But we want to reduce database expenses because it can get out of control really fast. And it can also get complex really fast. And there are ways today that we can make that much simpler. We'll be talking more about that later on as well, but we want to improve overall database functionality and reduce costs at the same time. And then we have security. We can't talk about any of this without talking about security because security is really important. Everything that we do has to take a security-first approach. Security cannot be a bolt-on, and we have to look at security in the context of the network on up. When people think about security, a lot still think about firewalls, but we want security baked into every aspect of every device and every application that we deploy into the environment, and that's something that we have to think about no matter what we choose to move forward with in our organizations. Now, the question is, what if you could get everything that I just presented from a single vendor? Well, that is what a number of vendors are trying to do today, and few have succeeded as well as a company like Nutanix. So this modern platform includes robust and scalable compute and storage, a complete set of end-user computing support services such as VDI or desktops as a service, which I'll talk about later on. Cloud-like support and scalability, a global reach for all of this. Robust application support. We don't want to have to compromise on the kinds of applications we can operate with a modern platform. We need database management. We're screaming for database management. Finding good database administrators is really hard and they're really expensive. And we have to have edge support that includes robust Internet of Things support, as well as providing artificial intelligence and machine learning application capabilities that we don't always see in legacy systems. So there's some critical strategic pillars, and the number one thing is in a different color for a reason. When we think about transforming our organizations, when we think about digital transformation, the willingness to embrace cultural change around business and technology is vital. That cultural change is the hardest part of digital transformation. And if you can't get that done, you can't truly embrace the outcomes you can enjoy from digital transformation. You also need a business strategy that embraces digital transformation. Just being able to go out and say, I want to digitally transform is meaningless. You have to have a strategy to do so. And a strategy has to be aligned with IT and data governance policies and procedures you have in your organization. A governance strategy that oversees all of this is critically important. And that governance paradigm needs to include input from all the stakeholders that have a stake in the organization. And you have to have a technology strategy that's based on a comprehensive platform that eliminates silos and increases overall manageability of the environment. Thank you very much for joining me today for this particular part of the presentation, and I look forward to seeing you in the rest of our event. The first topic in today's event is improving and securing business operations through enhanced end-user computing capabilities. A critical part of every IT organization is the end-user computing environment, and we're going to talk about improving and securing business operations through enhanced end-user computing capabilities in this presentation. We're going to talk about a lot here today, so please pay attention. There has been a resurgence of interest in end-user computing innovation in recent years, and that's for a lot of reasons that we'll cover. I'm going to answer the question, is it finally the year of VDI? And we've heard that for a lot of years, this whole year of VDI discussion, and we'll have some discussion about that shortly. We'll discover the current challenges that are inherent in VDI, as well as some legacy challenges that we've overcome. You'll be introduced to VDI versus desktop as a service. Desktop as a service is a new way to do end-user computing, and we'll compare these solutions to help you understand where desktop as a service may be a better fit for you. There's also some choices to make in the world of desktop as a service, specifically between on-premises and cloud-based services. And then we'll wrap up with a discussion around why hyperconverged infrastructure is the ideal platform for both VDI and desktop as a service. End-user computing is on the rise. As the world grapples with adopting work-from-home technologies, end-user computing technology has begun to take center stage in a way it never did before. Organizations around the world are struggling right now to deploy remote workforce-friendly technologies. And this includes end-user computing services like VDI and desktop as a service. If you're not familiar with the term VDI, it stands for Virtual Desktop Infrastructure, and it brings to the desktop environment what virtualization brought to the server environment, a different way to do computing. Remote workforces require a consistent environment in which to operate. What we see with a lot of remote workforces is people are using whatever devices they want, and organizations sometimes struggle with supporting the myriad devices that users have out there. We have laptops, Windows laptops, Apple laptops, we have Chromebooks, we've got iPads, tablets, iPhones, Android phones. What's needed is a way to bring some consistency to the end user computing environment so people can continue to use any device they want, whether it's their own personal devices like I just mentioned, or a remote access terminal, but get a common and consistent desktop computing environment that your organization provides them to do their work. Centralized desktop environments can also enhance security. One of the biggest risks that organizations face as they deploy work-from-home environments is the potential for data leakage. That is, data being installed on someone's laptop or mobile device, and then that device being stolen and proper security precautions not being adhered to for the data that's on that device. A centralized desktop environment that's provided by your organization that's then consumed as a service allows users to get a desktop, but all the data is retained inside the data center or inside the cloud environment that's providing that desktop service. Now, virtual desktops are not a new concept. This idea has been around for a really long time, in fact, since the mainframe days, but the modern iteration of virtual desktops came since virtualization jumped on the scene with the x86 world back in the early 2000s. And ever since modern virtualization took hold, people have wanted to apply those same methodologies to the desktop. But early on in the days of virtual desktops, lofty hopes soon gave way to reality as organizations struggled with getting what they were hoping for as outcomes in their VDI environments. Every year since this, people have jokingly referred to as the year of VDI. Is this the year where VDI finally takes hold? I think we're starting to get closer, but there's a lot of different ways we can attack this beast these days. But there's a lot of challenges inherent in VDI. The biggest one is it's hard to deploy quickly. Even with the right hardware solution, there's a whole lot of complexity that goes into these sorts of environments. And in early on, with the early days of VDI, infrastructure issues massively hindered success. I lived through this. I remember sitting down with Excel trying to figure out what I needed as far as storage services go to support a robust VDI environment, and it just wasn't affordable. Once hyperconverged infrastructure and flash storage hit the scene, those largely solved that problem, but these were the early days of VDI not being well supported prior to the advent of hyperconvergence and flash storage. Those solutions emerged to handily address the issue, but when we see organizations trying to roll do-it-yourself hardware solutions, they remain pretty complex, and we still see organizations doing this, where they're trying to cobble together the right set of compute, storage, and networking devices that can support a pretty healthy VDI organization. Regardless, though, in VDI, even with the right hardware, software complexity can still be a beast. We see the need for a whole bunch of services that we have to perfectly configure, and it can take a long time to get a good VDI solution out of the data center. That means these are very capital expenditure intensive, CapEx. There's a lot of spend that goes into buying the hardware and the software up front to make these things work. This is where desktops as a service comes in. This is a turnkey implementation. Literally, you buy an appliance, put it in the data center, or run it in the cloud, and you have desktops. That easy. All the hardware and software is included in the appliance. If you want to get going right away, you go buy a cloud version, and you're up and running literally in minutes with desktops. It's pretty phenomenal. So this eliminates the hardware and software complexity that's inherent in VDI deployments. Everything you need is built in from the hardware and software perspective. It's ready to go. These are OpEx intensive. Now that doesn't mean they're expensive, but you've shifted the spend from a CapEx spend to an operational spend. This is a pay-as-you-go model for the end user computing environment. We've wanted to do pay-as-you-go around for almost everything in IT, and this is a way we can bring that to the desktop world. It's not quite as flexible as VDI. One of the things with VDI that you get is you get the ability to build a perfectly tailored environment for your specific needs. You can get close with desktop as a service or DaaS, but it's not quite as flexible as VDI, but for the vast majority of use cases out there, it's not going to be a problem. So how do they compare? Well, there's a few things we want to consider. One is the level of complexity. With VDI, they're generally not simple, so we have a medium to high complexity. With DaaS, it's a set it and forget it sort of thing. You put the appliance in or you subscribe to a cloud service, and it's a low level of complexity to get things up and running. That means your time to value is also very low. You can basically get immediate results, which is a good thing. And it can take a while to deploy a VDI solution because you have to build so much and configure so much. When we think about the spend, OpEx versus CapEx, VDI is a capital expenditure intensive resource, and DaaS is going to take some OpEx funds, which is what we're looking for a lot of services today where we want to transform into a pay-as-you-go model. Level of customization, you don't get a whole lot with DaaS. You get some, but you get a lot more VDI, although I do expect to see this change as DaaS continues to mature. I think we'll start to see that approach VDI levels of customizability. And I may be being too harsh on DaaS here because there's actually a whole lot you can do with it, even around getting access to GPUs for acceleration, and a lot of things that you can still do with VDI, but that are much more complex. And the best location to operate a VDI environment is on premises, although there are some cloud services that can help you with that. DaaS, you can run either place. Most commonly, you're going to see it running in the cloud, but there are on-premises DaaS solutions that are available that allow you to run in your own data center. So when you start to think about desktop as a service, that on-premises versus in the cloud question is really important. So from a support perspective, on-premises, you're still going to get support from the vendor. This is an as-a-service, so even if it's in your on-premises data center environment, the vendor will still help you, or your IT organization may need to be called upon for certain activities. If you're running desktop as a service in the cloud, the provider is going to do all of the work to support you, and you're going to just be able to consume the desktops the way you want. From a hardware delivery standpoint, the appliances, the servers that make it all work. With an on-premises environment, the provider will provide those and you'll install them in your data center. That's not an issue in the cloud because you just consume the software-based instantiation of your DaaS environment and you go on your way. There's no hardware to work with. And again, that's also for other hardware. So you may need some internal networking resources to make everything work in an on-premises environment. In the cloud, it's all provided. You don't have to worry about that. From an ability to scale, so to add more desktops, the amount of latency you have in an on-premises environment, you'll have to wait for a new hardware appliance. Now, the provider will constantly monitor your environment to help you determine when you may run out of capacity and have to add more desktops. So they will monitor that and they will proactively send you an appliance as much as they possibly can. This is not a concern in the cloud because you can just add more resources as needed. And reliability of both is high because as you look at DaaS in an on-premises environment, they're going to make sure that there's a high availability mechanism there, but it is still dependent on some local activity that takes place in the data center. In the cloud, there's going to be a guaranteed provider-centric SLA, service level agreement, that will make sure your environment stays operational as much as possible. When it comes to hyperconverged infrastructure in both VDI and DaaS, they both benefit from the inherent conformity and scalability in an HCI deployment. Desktop workloads are very consistent. So whereas server workloads vary in size and complexity, desktop workloads, there's just a few varieties we have to work with. So it's very easy to linearly scale a VDI environment much easier than it is a server computing environment. And that makes them a perfect fit for hyperconverged infrastructure. In fact, some of the earliest use cases around HCI were to support those complex VDI scenarios, and they solved the problem. VDI and DAS workload predictability is very, very high, and that's one of the reasons that it's so perfect for HCI. And hyperconverged infrastructure's flash-centric architecture makes sure that those legacy VDI performance issues are a thing of the past in a modern environment. As I've mentioned elsewhere in this presentation, we want invisible IT, and that goes down to the end-user computing environment. We don't want to have a great level of complexity in these environments. And with hyperconverged infrastructure's flash centricity, as well as linear scalability, the architecture, the Apple appliance is all but forgotten, and you can focus on providing the best possible environment to your users. Thank you very much for watching.
Now, please welcome Nutanix's Chief Information Officer, Wendy Pfeiffer, who will provide us with insight on working from home and enabling a remote workforce.
Hi, I'm Wendy Pfeiffer, and I'm Nutanix's CIO. And today I am talking about working from home, and I'm actually working from home as I'm talking about it. So many of us have been affected by the coronavirus, and there are so many tech companies, especially here in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, that have sent all of their employees home to work from home. And you know, wow, what a huge societal shift. I was thinking about those of us in IT and what we can bring to this equation. And I realized that in some ways, we've been training for this all our lives. You know, in IT, we are kind of a special breed. Yes, we are technologists, but beyond the fact that we're technologists, we are also people who love process. We know how to operate technology at some, specific scale. And then in addition to operating technology, we also care about people. I'm telling you, after about 25 years in IT, there is no way that I could keep doing this job if I didn't care about people and how we apply technology to people. So you take us in IT with our love of tech, but our love of process and operations and our love of people. And we are the people who, the Marvel comics were written for, the DC comics were written for. We're the people who breathlessly watch Star Trek and say, we want to go where no man has gone before. We're the ones who dream of being heroes, but being kind of a geeky sort of hero, heroes in tech. And, right now in our world, we're in need of some heroes, even the geeks, even those of us who are a little bit afraid, even those of us who are a little bit paranoid. I say to IT people in particular, hey guys, this is what we've trained for. This is what we prepared for. All of those times in our lives when, we played the Space Invader games and we sort of hoped that someday the aliens would come and we could fight them off. Like, this is that moment. The alien is tiny. But right now we have something. Most of us are already prepared, and most of us are already using tools and technologies that are ready to scale in this situation. So I think about my own company. We are a global organization. Today we have thousands of employees, and about half of those employees already work remotely. And also, to interact with each other, we have to interact remotely if we're going to engage the entire global team. So we have a bunch of tools that we use that help us to do that. But the most important components of those tools are access and automation. So when it comes to access, we need to make sure that not only can people access tools in our offices, but when they go home, there may be a couple of different conditions that they're dealing with. One condition might be that they're using a personal computer instead of a work-provided one. And secondly, they might have really spotty internet access. But that shouldn't stop them from having access to the company's applications. At Nutanix, we use a product called Frame that is a virtual desktop that runs over public internet. So people can use Frame to access their work desktop remotely, even over bad internet connections, and also they can access securely. There are other VDI solutions out there from our partner Citrix and others that are also good alternatives. But if we're able to access access remotely through this VDI interface. We have secure access, we have decent performance, and we have all the applications and tools that we're used to. You know, that's been in place for years, and this is just a time where we can scale that out. Other things we can do is we can take advantage of automation. You know, it's not possible sometimes for us nowadays to walk up to a help desk and get help, but we have a number of tools that can help us autonomously, that can direct us to someone who understands how to answer the question, or sometimes we can even do our own self-service and our own troubleshooting. Those things are available to us. You know, I worry, of course, about the spread of this disease, but at the same time, I think about the IT heroes all throughout the country and even globally who have already built out the capabilities that we need. Access to the SaaS applications, access to our company's applications. Now's our time, and eventually we're going to be past this thing. And when we are, and when they write the history of this thing, I think that there's going to be some geeky, scared heroes in the mix. It's people like you and me who built our infrastructure solidly, openly, and to scale. That's what's getting us through. And that infrastructure will help us to connect inside of our companies, to connect with our neighbors who may need our help, and also to make the process of working from home a little bit more enjoyable. You know, there's potential, you know, maybe we might take a break and watch a little Netflix, but ultimately we're able to be focused, we're able to be productive, and most importantly, we're able to collaborate at scale just the way we have been when we were coming into the office. I think that we have hard times ahead, but I also think that our future is solid as we transform how we work and we use IT and technology to change how we are able to be productive for our companies.
Now I'd like to introduce Brian Sir, Principal Technical Marketing Engineer at Nutanix.
Hello, my name is Brian Sir, and today I'm going to be talking about end-user computing, specifically focusing on desktop as a service and VDI. VDI has been very important since the inception of Nutanix about 10 years ago. So we're going to kind of break this into the two categories as mentioned. On the left you see virtual desktops, a very mature solution. Nutanix plays a very important part as providing the underlying infrastructure for these. And it's been something that, you know, we've done essentially from day one, right? It's very preeminent in healthcare, financial service, and public sector type of implementations. You also see a lot of it in road office extensions of the enterprise, right? So we have thousands of customers doing this. They're enjoying our one-click simple operations, supporting tens and hundreds of thousands of users. On the other side, we have desktop as a service, right? This is more of a service that you consume, as the name implies. And this is great for temporary remote workers, seasonal workloads, or just customers or organizations that are looking to have a fully managed control plane for this type of service. So basically the ability to deploy Windows apps inside a browser, and we see great traction in the education, government, and engineering use cases. So freedom is a very big choice here at Nutanix, definitely around end-user computing, provide a great deal of flexibility, really probably the most flexible option in terms of your choices when it comes to end-user computing. On the on-prem side, running on our hyper-converged infrastructure, you have the choice of hypervisors. So we support Hyper-V, we have a Nutanix AHV, and obviously VMware ESXi. That translates into great flexibility in the brokers. With Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, you have the same ability to use any of those three hypervisors, which gives you great flexibility there. Frame supports AHV for on-prem workloads, and then has the option to use all the major public cloud providers for running public resources in the public cloud. You can obviously do the Microsoft RDS stack, and then with VMware Horizon, use ESXi. And then all the provisioning options that are available with each of those brokers, you're free to use on us, so you have maximum flexibility, whether you're doing persistent, non-persistent, or any of the fancy cloning type operations that any of the brokers offer. Let's first take a look at some of the benefits of VDI on Nutanix. and then we'll look at DAS after that. So the VDI stack, whether you're running Citrix on-prem, Horizon on-prem, or even Frame on HV on-prem, is really focused on our hyper-converged offering, right? This is scale-out hyper-converged storage. Very flexibility in the underlying platform, but really the big benefit is in the simple one-click operations, for deployment, upgrades, monitoring your VMs, all those type of operations. And then the real benefit that we hang our hat on is the consistent user experience, and we get consistent user experience because of our data locality, right? We're the only offering to have data locality, and this helps with boot storms, with a bunch of logins. When users launch their applications, you get that same consistent performance no matter the size of your cluster. And then we talk about linear scaling, right? If you hear the linear scaling story, you probably say, geez, pretty much any hyper-converged offering offers me linear scaling. And in some sense they do, right? You get the ability to add nodes, and each node gives you some compute capacity and certainly some storage performance and storage capacity, obviously. The difference is through locality, Nutanix provides a consistent experience, so consistent performance because of the locality. So you get the same excellent user experience that you got on the 3-node cluster when you started to when you scale out to thousands of users on 10, 20, 30 nodes, etc. Right? You get that same experience. Whereas options without locality are going to eventually, slowly teeter off and then fall off a cliff, much like the sands of the old days in the early VDI days. Some of the other benefits besides just a compute storage platform that Nutanix offers is with Nutanix Files, you get the ability to provide file services natively on the same cluster or separately on a dedicated cluster if you want to at such scale, so that you can provide essential services for these end-user computing deployments. Within VDI, there are common needs for departmental shares. You want to run user profiles, home directories, all those types of services. Typically need an SMB or a file share. So what better way to do this than a one-click deployment with Nutanix Files? Gives you simple upgrades and the ability to scale out in terms of number of users, connections, the amount of storage that you'd like Files to provide. And then last up under VDI is the ability to secure desktops. So if you're using AHV as underlying hypervisor, so you could do that with Citrix running on top or with Frame running on top of that. And then your on-prem workers running on the HV cluster can benefit from the security that Nutanix Flow offers. So this is the ability to use simple to set up security policies to control the inbound and outbound traffic from any of your VDI pools. And even as the image shows, the top 3 ones, we can even stop them from communicating inter-VMs. So to help prevent the spread of infection, malware, etc., you can stop the communication within a pool. Or if you need to allow it, then as the bottom group shows, you can allow that. This is all done from inside Prism, so there's no need to deploy a separate tool or have a separate interface. It's all combined with our single stack. Next up, we will take a look at Frame and some of the benefits that Desktop as a Service offers. So Nutanix Frame is essentially a VDI solution. You can present desktops or applications, and you do that by presenting them to users, and then their end client is just any HTML5 browser. So whether you have a phone, a laptop, a PC, if it has an HTML5 browser, you can connect to a Frame session. So Frame is truly hybrid and multi-cloud. What that means is you have the ability you can run your desktops and applications on any of the major public cloud providers, so AWS, Azure, Google. And then if you want to run on-prem, whether in just a dedicated on-prem or a hybrid scenario, you can use Nutanix HV on-prem. So it gives you great flexibility on where you want to run your desktops and applications. And it has all the features and functionalities that you would come to expect. One of the crown jewels, besides being a native cloud-based control plane, is a Frame remoting protocol. Was built for streaming type services, so it auto-adjusts for bandwidth and latency, and then you get all your typical type of experiences that you would look for from a virtual desktop solution there on the right side. And then again, customer choice and flexibility comes in on the frame side also, right? We already mentioned about the ability to run it on-prem on HV or in the major public cloud providers in the first box. In the second box, you get your choice of many of the major authentication providers. So if you are using something other than Active Directory, you can use all those, and typically anything that's SAML based, you have the option for that. And then certainly would bring your own apps. So we support Windows and Linux for apps and desktops. And then you can use for files and data. You can obviously use any of the major drive sharing options to be able to connect to your sessions. And then final flexibility, since it's just HTML5 browser, you can get that flexibility in the connecting from, pretty much any device. So why Nutanix Frame? So it's an easy way to access corporate desktops and apps and your data. You give somebody the option to give a full-blown desktop experience, or just present them a single app or a group of applications, whichever makes sense for your requirements. Has the native integration with the file sync and share options out there, and then easy drag and drop. So it's flexible on the infrastructure side, again, public cloud options, and the ability to use HV on-prem. And you can do that all from a single frame subscription that covers you on both sides. So it's very easy to deploy and manage within, basically minutes to hours. It's very easy to get a frame deployment off ground. Once you've got your tenant signed up, you can very quickly take the default image, begin to install your applications into that sandbox image, and then publish that to your users, and they can be off and running and be able to connect to that. It's integrated with the public cloud providers, and uses their native APIs for quick provisioning. And it's very easy to deploy 1,000 desktops in just hours. So now we'll have a look at a quick frame demo. We'll look at what the client-side connection is, and then a quick peek at what it looks like to do the administration side of Frame. Okay, now we're looking at the client side of the Frame demo. I've already logged into my Frame account, and what we're looking at here is called the Launchpad. This is where a user is presented with their desktop sessions that they have options, and then if they have access to any applications, they would see them listed here next to the desktop icon. My session here, I've just got one desktop pool assigned to me, so I'm going to go ahead and click on this and launch a session. You can see I'm just running this within my Chrome browser, so it's easily accessible inside the browser. Launching a Windows 10 session here. And then once inside the session, I'm ready to work just as if I had a normal desktop that I can experience. My applications, are available, through icons just like they normally would be. This is a full desktop. Use it just as you would a physical desktop. All on the bottom here are some frame sessions for the protocol. So I get to see how much bandwidth I'm using. The latency even shows the distance from where I'm physically located. And since this is a cloud instance, it's the number of distance between me and where my instance is running. If I'd like more stats, I can get more stats about the session, how much bandwidth I want. I can even turn the settings up and down. So if I want to use less bandwidth, if I'm doing something less graphically intense, I have the ability to limit those if I want. You can certainly pause your session, disconnect, do all those normal typical types of one. You can have both a non-GPU or a GPU-enabled session, so there are a number of different sizes and capabilities for the VMs that you can use through Frame in the public cloud. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect from my session here. And then once we're back at the Launchpad, since I have administrator access, I'm going to go ahead and click up here and go back to I'm going to go to the dashboard. Now we're looking at the administrator side of Frames. So you can see through the Summary tab here, I can see that we're running on AWS for our infrastructure. If we had multiple infrastructures running in the different public clouds or different regions of AWS, I would see that all listed here. We're just using just one availability zone on Amazon, so that's represented here. I can see, active sessions, etc. through this. The sandbox is really our master image for this group of users. You can have multiple launch pads. Think of them as pools of desktops within your Frame tenant. This one we just have a single one, so I have a single sandbox image. My sandbox image is a Windows 10 desktop which has just a couple of basic applications installed in that. I could present these applications directly if I so chose, but I just have them presented as a desktop as an option. Frame will automatically recognize if I start up this sandbox image and I install an application, it will auto sense that there's a new application and then show it in the list here and give me the option to present it or just let it be consumed through a desktop. And the control plane will take backups on a regular basis of your image so that if you need to roll back to a previously known good sandbox image, you have the ability to do that. And then through launchpads, again, I can create multiple launchpads. These launchpads can limit the instance type. So, the different size of the VM for vCPUs and memory assigned to them, as well as the Pro models have GPU on the backside. So through throwing the toggle switches, I can control what users have access to and create them and then control that through role-based access. Through the user side, again, I can set up my authentication as mentioned in the slide deck. We support, obviously Active Directory, but all the popular SAML 2 providers as shown in the slides. Through the capacity side of things, I can manage, the minimum number of instances that I want, any buffer instances, which is like a small slush fund, so that if I have users logged in and I want to wait for them to have new desktops created, there should be a small amount there waiting. And obviously I can choose the maximum. And then you can set schedules so that if you want to, all your users log in at 8 o'clock and I need at least 100 desktops, so I can pre-queue that up so that there's 100 there waiting for them and meet that demand so they get quick logins and don't need to wait for those to be created. There's some great back-end analytics so you understand, what's going on in your environment. So you can obviously see the number of sessions. We can look at different time frames, daily, weekly, hour, monthly, all those types. I can see different usages. It shows me in time, disk usage, and a number of different metrics in there. And then through the settings tab, this is where I can control, policy of what's going on inside there. So I have a lot of session-based things I can choose, whether I'd like to let people, be able to download things from their session, interact with the clipboard. I can set network policy to limit, the frame rate, how much bandwidth they consume, all those important type of things that we want to choose. Through availability zones, I can choose, do we just going to use a single zone or not? Through profiles, we can choose if we're going to manage user profiles, which typically is a very popular option. We can set up domain settings, etc. So it's very easy to set all these things up. And the control plane, again, is just a cloud service. So this is managed by Nutanix. It's upgraded by Nutanix. It's highly available. So the only thing that you're responsible for there is, managing your desktop OS and installing the applications and getting the users to connect to it. Hope you enjoyed the demo and look forward to some questions and answer in the session. Thank you.
The first question is, how do I know what path I should choose? I mean, I think that they're asking about, VDI versus DAS versus some other thing.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, I think that question could go one of two ways, right? There's kind of the VDI versus DAS, and then there's probably also the choice, should I use Citrix or Horizon or Frame, right? So let's take the first one, VDI or DAS. So VDI or DAS really kind of comes down to, where, do you want to manage the control plane or not, right? So if you don't mind deploying the VDI broker and doing the upgrades and, kind of the traditional path, then VDI, offers you that flexibility. And you can typically run even VDI in the cloud to some extent, so you can still get some cloud options. If you want to just subscribe to a service and have the control plane managed for you, then, DAS is the path there, right? And equally with Frame, you can run your VDI desktops both in the cloud or on-prem on HV. And then on the kind of the second side of that is how would you know whether you should go down the Citrix or VMware path or, go to Frame, right? And I think that has a lot to do with maybe your any already investments that you have maybe. So if you're already a Citrix customer and you're happy and it's doing well for you, same with Horizon, right? It makes most sense that you should probably continue down that path. And then Nutanix HCI makes an excellent choice to run that infrastructure on. But if you're brand new to DAS or to VDI, and you're looking and you're interested in that cloud control plane and that solution, then Frame is a place you'd probably look first.
Sounds good. The next question is, what platforms does Files support?
Yeah, so Files works on both clusters that run VMware ESXi and Nutanix HV, right? So those are the two main hypervisors for us. Covers, I think probably at least 90% of our deployments today. So it covers both of those options, so you can use it with all the different solutions.
Excellent. And the last question we have time for is, can Frame help control cloud costs?
Yeah, certainly. So there are features built into Frame, which I briefly, touched in the presentation. But you're allowed to control, certainly the number of desktops and VMs providing apps. You're allowed to control how many exist at any one time. You're allowed to set some schedules so they are created and deleted and stay within some ranges for you at a specific time. So it gives you control over what you want, right? You don't want, if you have 1,000 users but they're not always there, you can just elect to have some percentage of that on and waiting, and then as more people come online, then it'll just keep spinning up some. So there's always a buffer to help keep those costs under control.
Excellent. Brian, thank you for answering those questions, and thank you again for your presentation.
We're now going to embark on our second topic of today's event, entitled Ushering in a New Era of Database Support with Hyperconvergence and Database as a Service. Please join me in welcoming Monica Kumar, Senior Vice President of Product and Solutions Marketing at Nutanix.
Hello, and welcome to my first keynote ever from my home office. We're going to talk about the future of your data is autonomous today. My name is Monica Kumar, and I'm a Senior Vice President of Product and Solutions Marketing at Nutanix. Prior to Nutanix, I was at Oracle for over 2 decades, where I ran the database marketing practice there. So it's only appropriate that I be talking about data and its importance to businesses and to the world. In fact, as we speak, the world is going through a dreadful COVID-19 pandemic. Imagine if all we had were people's opinions on how we contain and how we tackle and how we treat and how we beat this virus. But the fact is that there is data that's driving our insights into COVID-19 and the way it spreads, how fast it spreads, and how do we flatten the curve, and how do we all stay safe and decrease the number of fatalities from COVID-19. It is data that is being collected worldwide. Its access is analyzed and used to tackle this deadly virus. So next to people, data has become the most important asset for organizations and for their success. In fact, organizations that use data to make relevant business decisions are smarter and much more competitive than their counterparts. Isn't it funny how science fiction is now becoming reality in many cases? Think about the movie and the shows that you watch where there were flying cars and self-running kitchens. Well, guess what? It's all becoming real now. And it's good news for us consumers because it's becoming real. The impact it's having on society is profound in many ways. Take, for example, self-operating kitchens. Analysts reckon that alone could save the food and beverage industry waste by 15%. That's billions of dollars in savings. Forbes calculates that self-driving cars of the future can save commuters 250 million hours of commute time. Imagine what you could do in that commute time. And guess what? Some of us are doing it right now because we are all sheltering at home and we have no commute. So think about it. If you could do that for a longer period of time, what would that mean to our lifestyle? So the impact from all these innovations can be everlasting and quite profound on all of society. So what does the future have in store for us? The common thread throughout is autonomous, where intelligent automation is powering the self-driving, flying, operating, kitchens, irrigation systems, farming, medicine, and so many different disciplines around us. Emory, a research and advisory company, shows that most major car manufacturers are targeting self-driving cars on the highways by 2021. IDC predicts that by 2022, 75% of enterprises will embed intelligent automation into technology and process development using AI-based software to discover operational and experimental insights to guide innovation. And Gartner claims that by 2020, more than 40% of data science tasks will be automated, resulting in increased productivity and broader use by citizen data scientists. So, as we turn to business and IT, it probably comes as no surprise to you that it's a bit like oil and water. Sometimes we don't mix. Now, with the global economy still very sluggish and getting probably worse with the pandemic, businesses on average are struggling to kickstart or recover and drive respectable growth. They turn to IT and technology as the means to enable innovation. But the reality is, in most cases, IT, we are having to spend too much of our time in just dealing with keeping the lights on and just maintenance work. So rather than focusing on innovation, IT is just focusing on grunt work, manual tasks, and keeping the light on. This becomes very evident when you look at the lack of growth and IT adoption in business to business sector versus the consumer sector. And as the demand from the lines of businesses grows, more and more businesses are turning to the data as the primary means to gain new insights in order to drive innovation for the future. Let's take marketing for example, right? This is what I care about as a marketer. Constantly looking for ways to better understand my prospects, my customer behavior, what triggers my customers to buy, where do you do most of your research, how do you engage with vendors when they are talking about these solutions, and what medium do you engage in. And I want to use the data to predict behavior and buying patterns so I can drive more targeted, more relevant, more personalized marketing campaigns towards my prospects and customers. Sales, on the other hand, they want to also know more about their customer. What are the challenges, the pain points? What advice, how can they advise their customer to solve the pain points, to become trusted advisor, and rally all the resources they can get to help the customer so they can customize the offer, they can win the deal, they can keep the customer, they can help the customer onboard, adopt, renew. And all this is, again, data driven as well. So think about what the lines of businesses are looking for. So while IT knows what the asks from the businesses are and what they need to do, the reality oftentimes looks quite different. Many organizations are still running on legacy and outdated technologies, infrastructure, and apps that in some cases are 20 plus years old. The disruption costs, the risks associated can be too high for companies to make the leap of faith to move everything over to a new platform. Add to that IT resources that are already spread too thin, right, and often overwhelmed. Now let's take databases for an example. In the US alone, the average DBA is managing over 40 databases, 1 DBA. It's no wonder that many critical tasks and security patches sometimes are missed, to the point that it can be detrimental to the company's brand and cost and reputation because of security breaches either internally or externally. So think about that. So how do we turn this on its head? How can we bring these seemingly two opposing forces together and help them to work in unison for the benefit of the company, the customers, and its employees? So we believe it's time to work on what we call a new currency, something that is common to both IT and business and can unite them in a quest to enable and deliver growth. And that currency is data. It empowers business. Data is the thread that ties the lines of business and IT functions together. Aside from employees and customers, data has become the most important asset for organizations today. And the analysts agree that uniting around data provides clearer and more quantifiable advantages to those companies that are able to harness the power of their data using smart technology to extract that value out of it. So new joint imperatives are already underway by business and IT to generate new sources of revenue using data. And that's called monetizing your data. It starts with IT building and delivering a modern hybrid cloud platform that's powerful, that's agile, elastic, and with the ability to spin up an environment in minutes while giving users the flexibility to build their apps in the cloud, but then run it on premises, or build the app on premises and run it in the cloud. The platform also needs to be both intelligent and automated, so it minimizes the exorbitant amounts of the time that would be otherwise required to mine and extract data and value from data. And above all, this most valuable asset should be secure and available. I mean, what good would it be to have your data locked up somewhere Of course, it's highly secure, but nobody can access it. The whole point is that data should be available and accessible real time with the right performance, the right reliability and availability, so the users can actually mine insights from that data. And security also becomes very important, specifically by each industry, in terms of adhering to compliance and governance regulations. According to Tony Baer of Database Insights, he's an industry analyst, it's evident that hybrid cloud is rapidly becoming the platform of choice as it gives customers that flexibility of being able to move some of their workloads into the cloud as needed and yet run legacy critical ones on premises as needed. And by the way, this applies to companies' data and therefore the databases, as they also want to benefit from their cloud, simplifying the database operations while not having to choose one platform over the other or running the two in parallel. So, with all this in mind, Nutanix has developed a truly modern cloud platform to facilitate business transformation and provide a path for customers to monetize your data. This platform that is hybrid, giving our customers choice, one that supports intelligent, automated operations so that valuable data can be extracted rapidly and efficiently, and where databases can be consolidated and easily managed all under one roof for simplicity and increased productivity. We took a really unique approach to architecting this solution. So first we started off with a single modern platform, as I said, which allows you to bring all of your database engines and workloads running on one hyper-converged platform. It consolidates and virtualizes all your databases for maximum efficiency, okay? And with simple one-click operations that allows you to easily manage your entire database estate. So now think about patching all your databases with a touch of a button or a single click, as we said, no downtime or weekend work required. Next, we layer on database as a service capabilities that now simplify and automate your database management lifecycle, freeing up all your DBA hours and hours spent in manually patching, cloning, updating databases for dev test or for any other uses. And now your DBAs can focus on higher value tasks such as data modeling, performance and diagnostics tuning and security versus focusing on manual grunt work. We then offer you choice of where you want to deploy all this. Is it on premises, behind your own firewall in a private cloud, or in your preferred public cloud, or both maybe? And finally, in addition to built-in security and availability of the Nutanix platform, we also provide additional services that can add a full spectrum of value, ensuring your data is compliant, fully protected, and can deliver rapid, intelligent insights for smarter business decisions, right? So for example, services like DR, disaster recovery, backing up your data, etc. All those are included as part of our platform. Our customers are experiencing firsthand how this platform and services is helping to transform their businesses. So as an example, take this large telecom provider in Kazakhstan. After deploying Nutanix solution for databases, they were able to accelerate their vital analytics performance by 5x, helping to deliver over 500 analytical reports much faster and help accelerate insight during quarterly financial reporting. Now take another example here. This is a global gaming company that IDC ran a customer spotlight on. After making a switch to Nutanix, they calculated savings in the millions of dollars, which ultimately freed them up to choose to invest the savings in new projects. Now, while this may be an extreme example, and it's a case very specific to this company of the savings that they achieved, and every customer situation is different, it does give you an idea of the efficiencies and savings you could possibly gain by using the Nutanix platform for database services. So as you can see, our unique approach to a single platform that leverages modern hyperconvergence, database services, and freedom of choice really helps to set us apart. And more importantly, offer compelling value across the IT and DBA spectrum, delivering the service level agreements like performance, the simplicity, the availability, and cost savings all in the single integrated solution offering. So what does all of this mean for the business in the end? How can database automation help? So if you think about this, IT and database teams can now take back control and deliver an efficient and effective solution for the business, one that moves them away from being in maintenance mode to helping drive innovation and becoming a real partner to the business. And then for the line of business, it means moving away from stagnation to really business transformation. Rather than waiting weeks and months to complete new projects and get valuable insights, they can now improve the time to market and release new products and services to market much more quickly. So think of the impact this can have on the company if they can outpace their competition by a factor of X or develop a new business process that dramatically improves customer satisfaction. That could be significant for a company's success. So, as we conclude this keynote, let's take a quick look at what we just covered and what this might mean for you as a valued customers going forward. So, one, I think we can all agree that apart from our employees and customers, data is our most valuable asset. And if we can harness it and unlock its true potential, then that will undoubtedly provide us with new economic advantages that can fuel future business growth. Number two, the challenge is finding the right platform that can enable this in a smart and automated fashion. That at the same time is easy to deploy and manage and administer, and one that offers the latest in security and availability and meets the performance needs of the business, both now and in the future. And of course, one that can generate a higher ROI for the business. And we believe that we have a solution that can get you there. A single powerful platform that allows you to easily manage and operate all of your database under one management platform, coupled with cloud-like database services that makes the database lifecycle much more automated and simpler, with the service level agreements that you need with performance, scalability, reliability, and security and availability. I really hope that you found this information useful. I encourage you to stay on and learn more about Nutanix's database solutions, and also visit us at nutanix.com/databases. Thank you again for joining me today, and I wish you all the best.
And now, Jeremy Lanier, Director of Product Management at Nutanix.
So what Nutanix is trying to do, and what Nutanix is offering, is a end-to-end database platform with a product called Era that works in conjunction with the underlying HCI stack that Nutanix has been shipping and selling for the last decade. At the core of this offering is the core HCI platform. That gives you that fundamental infrastructure platform for the performance you need, for the scalability, for elasticity, both scale out as well as scale up applications, the ability to quickly add more capacity and growth to auto heal the underlying infrastructure. That core HCI gives you that foundation. And we see many examples of customers running the most mission critical of business critical applications on top of the Nutanix platform. In some cases, 100 plus terabyte Oracle environments, SAP environments, SQL Server, of course, many of these sort of things. But what we want to do is we want to layer that set of infrastructure services with a set of database platform services that can really bring a database-centric perspective to the lifecycle of those databases. And so with Era, what we do is we introduce database platform services in such a way that you can take all of our recommended best practices that have been lab tested and qualified and combine that with your own standards and publish those into service catalogs that can expose new build automation for standing up a new SQL Server environment or a new Oracle environment or Postgres, etc. And then after that environment has been provisioned, manage the lifecycle of it, maintain it, monitor it, track alerts for those databases, back it up using the Nutanix platform to be able to take database consistent backups of that environment, and then duplicate that data set, right, where necessary. And so it's really about providing a lifecycle management around those databases, not just the 0 day, but second day, third day, etc., over the lifecycle of those databases. It's a platform that is at its core API first. And what that means is that anything you can do from a GUI, you can do from a RESTful API or from a command line interface. And it's also a platform that is database engine agnostic. And what that means is anything you can do with one database, you can do the exact same flow in the exact same way for other databases. So whether this is Oracle, SQL Server, some other database engine, you have the exact same type of experience for managing your databases. So let me flip over and I'll show you a quick demo of how this works. I'm going to just show you a quick example of how we would look at a database environment, the types of things we would see for that, and show you how we would back up, protect it, and then and be able to duplicate that data into a new database server environment. So what I'm showing you here is the key sort of dashboard for Era. It's providing a database-centric lens, so I can see all the databases that are running on the Nutanix cluster. I can see any alerts, notifications, warnings, storage usage, things of this nature. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a database in question that has been around for a while. This particular database is an Oracle environment, and what I'm going to show you with this database is that it's a managed entity. It's something that's been managed by Nutanix. So Nutanix is aware of the fact that the database is running. It's not just database running in a VM. It's actually a database that, in this case, is highly available as a rack deployment across multiple physical Nutanix nodes, right? And so we're maintaining that awareness, and we're providing the lifecycle management. Not only the builds and configurations for the Oracle deployment, the topology across the rack perspective, but also the patching levels, how it's described to a particular patch train to get particular updates and builds as part of an automated process, and then tying it into a platform-assisted backup recovery model using something called a time machine. And think of the time machine as really nothing more than a promise to protect your database data by using a combination of the Nutanix HCI platform's underlying snapshot technology, along with database consistent API calls to quiesce databases and to put them into a safe transaction consistent state before leveraging the underlying storage to back it up. But what it does is it gives you a really nice end-to-end platform to manage and run your databases. And so looking at this time machine, you can see that this is a very nice catalog of different points in time that I can choose to recover my database data from. This is an Oracle environment. It's over 2 terabytes in size. And what I'm going to do in this example is I'm just going to select a point in time, such as maybe yesterday, and I'm going to say I want to recover this database to, say, 8:57 in the morning. Okay, and by doing so, what's going to happen is I'm going to make a thin copy of that database. It can be an in-place restore, or it could be a duplication of that data into a downstream environment, another test environment or dev environment. And that data set itself will be thin, right? It's going to be created near instantaneously, and it won't consume any additional space until you start to make changes to that database environment. And so this is going to allow you to rapidly spin up test copies, dev copies of databases. It allows you to quickly support restoration and rollback of your database environment. And it does so without the typical overhead of having to go through backup restore processes and lengthy downtime cycles to do so. So let's go ahead and clone a data environment here. I'll just go ahead and select a server that I want to put the clone on. Now, what's interesting here is when we think about the whole lifecycle management, it's not just how do you manage the data for your databases and how do you protect them and stuff. It's also how do you patch your database servers? How do you define the standard configs for those database servers? And how do you build out new database servers? One of the things I'm going to show you is how you can take a copy of test data from a production environment and actually duplicate that into a brand new Oracle footprint, a brand new set of Oracle database servers along with that test data. So let's go ahead and create a brand new database environment. We're going to just choose a name here. We'll give it a t-shirt size in terms of the spec of the virtual machine. We'll put it on a particular network. I'll go ahead and supply a public key so that after I build this environment, I can SSH and connect to it from an administrative perspective. Let's go ahead and set a new password. And then I'll go ahead and clone that database environment. But before I clone, I want to show you how we can take this whole model and quickly turn it into something that you can call programmatically from an API. And the way we're going to do that is by leveraging this feature called API equivalent. So as an example, I've just walked through a 3-step process to clone an Oracle database, a multi-terabyte Oracle environment, and spin it up on a new database VM running on a Nutanix cluster with a new set of tunable parameters and a new set of virtual machine configs, but with thin copies of that database data. That exact same thing can be called from an API. And to do so is very simple. I just click on this link. I get a sample of the scripted command that is calling that API endpoint with the JSON payload. And I can see an example of this script being called in a number of various programming languages: Perl, Python, Go language, JavaScript, even PowerShell. If I want to do this in PowerShell, this is literally the PowerShell file that I would download and then run from a PowerShell command, PowerShell terminal, and that would talk to that REST API and spin up that new database environment with the test data. And so this power of the API is pervasive throughout the entire database platform. And what it does is it makes it really easy for you to use the UI in a fully RBAC multi-user enabled model, or programmatically interact with the entire platform from an external source, such as a continuous build development environment, from a third-party service portal such as ServiceNow or Calm, and be able to call into our APIs in a nice, easy to consume way that doesn't require you to hire an army of developers. And finally, when I'm done, I'll start the cloning process. It will track that as a fully audited operation where I know the user that is performing that task, the state of the task, any operational details. If the user is subscribed to notifications, they may be notified about the success or failure of that task. So all of that can be tracked on a per user basis, and it's designed in such a way that based on what roles and permissions you may have visibility just to your sets of databases and resources, or you may have access to other people's resources. So that's all definable through a permission model, so that you have a really nice control plane for managing your databases, whether they're sitting on one cluster or multiple clusters at different availability zones and geographic regions. So I'm going to stop there with the demo, but I wanted to thank you very much for your time today, and I hope this gives you a good appreciation for what Nutanix is bringing to the table to help simplify your database operations. I will leave you with one word, and that is Nutanix has spent the last decade making data center management simple and simplifying how you manage your applications in the data center. What we're doing with Era is bringing the same type of simplicity to databases and to DBA teams. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeremy, for your presentation. We have a few questions from our audience. First of all, what databases are supported in Era?
So that's a great question. Era is really designed to support a wide range of databases. So initially, our focus has been on traditional relational databases, including support for Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, as well as some open source variants like Postgres, MySQL, MariaDB, etc.
Very good. What do you mean by database cloning, refresh, and restore?
That's a great question. It's very common in the enterprise environment to need to duplicate your database data into downstream environments, such as a UAT environment, some patch testing environment, development environment, or perhaps a business intelligence scenario where you're trying to duplicate your data and put into some sort of OLAP environment where you can create reports and generate data and mining from your transactional data. And so the whole point of copy data management is to manage the flow and the life cycle of the data, to be able to quickly duplicate it in a very time efficient manner, in a very space efficient manner, while maintaining some governance and some visibility over where your data is sitting. Is it sitting in one location? Does it have data sovereignty boundaries? How does that data exist in its life cycle across wherever geographies it happens to be in?
Great, thank you. And next question is, does Era have multi-user self-service authentication?
That's a great question. Yes, absolutely. And in fact, we think this is really essential for any enterprise product. So Era does support multi-factor authentication, multi-user authentication. It can be used with both local users managed within the system, as well as users tied from Active Directory. In addition to that, there's a robust role-based access control model where you can leverage some predefined existing out-of-box roles that define what you can do in the system. You can also create your own roles. So if you wanted to give somebody the ability to just patch databases and not do anything else, you could apply that privilege to a role and grant that role to an AD group or to an individual user very easily.
And I think you mentioned this, but Era does support multi-factor authentication.
Multi-factor authentication is something that is on our radar. It's not directly supported yet. If there are any cases where anybody in the audience would like to learn more about that, I would suggest you reach out to your local account team, and we can have a more in-depth conversation.
Next question that we have is, does Era require the database server to be on a Nutanix cluster?
That's another really good question. The short answer is, for full functionality, yes, we do want the database server to run as a VM or as a set of virtual machines on the Nutanix cluster. That's going to give you the full capabilities across zero-day provisioning and all of the second-day lifecycle management capabilities. However, there are some exceptions to that. It's very possible to keep your original source data outside of Nutanix in a bare metal environment or 3-tier virtual stack, and to leverage native database replication to get a copy of the database data onto a VM running on Nutanix. Once it's on Nutanix as a VM, Era can talk to it, Era can manage it, and Era can take backups and clone data from that. But it does require you to set up some initial database replication. So, for example, that could be DataGuard in the case of Oracle, or perhaps SQL Server always on replication in the case of Microsoft SQL Server.
And we have a bit of a technical question here. Does Era require volume groups like iSCSI or for the database server disks, or do regular vDisks work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So this is really for the best performance and scalability. We want to leverage a combination of both. There are scenarios where local disks make sense, and then there are other scenarios where we really want to leverage the aggregated throughput of volume groups and load balance volume groups on the Nutanix architecture. Because what that does is that allows us to really scale to incredibly vertical database stacks, 100 terabyte plus database stacks, as well as to be able to scale out in a horizontal fashion. So it gives you the most flexibility while guaranteeing that you get the best performance for your disk IOs.
Excellent. So does Nutanix support AIX?
AIX is not supported. It's something that's certainly on our roadmap. Our main focus right now has been to support any database that can run on an x86-based system. So Power is certainly something that is on our radar. And if you have a need for something like that, we'd certainly want to talk to you. We're also very capable of helping you from a services perspective with any big endian to little endian conversions. So if you need assistance with a migration from Power to x86, we can absolutely help you with that too.
Okay. And next up, does it require AHV, or can you use any hypervisor you want?
Great question. So Era as a database management plane is not tied exclusively to AHV. It can be used with both AHV as well as VMware's ESX. And so you have choice of hypervisor. You can pick and choose which one you want to run for your databases, and you'll still get the full set of capabilities.
How is Era licensed?
That's another really good question. So the most common way that Era is licensed is by virtual CPU. And what that basically means is that one just figures out how many database servers they're going to be running. They count the vCPUs allocated to those database servers, and that total sum is the quantity of licenses that they would purchase over a subscription term. We have an alternative method, which is also very common, and that method is primarily geared towards dedicated database clusters, where you're not planning to run any other applications besides databases on the Nutanix cluster. And in those circumstances, we will let you license by the physical core. So you can just license all the cores in the cluster and run as many copies of databases as you want, fully managed by Era.
And is there a minimum number of licenses that you have to license at one time?
Really, the short answer is no. For the virtual vCPU model, you can buy as little as one. For the core model, Nutanix clusters require a minimum of three nodes in a cluster for a quorum. So you would need to license all the cores across those 3 nodes as a baseline. But on the vCPU side, it could be as low as 1 vCPU.
Okay. And does Era recover production databases when they're corrupted?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Era has a robust way of capturing the state of database data in a transaction consistent way using a capability called the time machine. And that can be used to not only snapshot databases, transaction consistent for the purposes of cloning, but it can also be used to roll back that database to a previous point in time. And that's a very powerful feature that's available across Oracle, SQL Server, and with support for our open source databases to come in the near future.
And I think this leads to the next question, which is, do you support table level recovery with Era?
I'm on it.
Yeah, so good question. So table level recovery, in essence, sounds great, but it actually comes with its own set of baggage in that individually recovering a table can actually cause problems in terms of breaking referential integrity if there are joins or other relationships between tables in the database schema. And so by itself, it actually is not that useful of a feature. What we find more and more when we talk to DBAs is what they want to be able to do is they want to be able to take a copy of their database and bring it up side by side with the original database and then do a surgical repair where they go in and comparing the two, they compare the differences and they do some logical table export from one copy of the database to the other copy. The value of Era is that we can make that second copy created almost instantaneously, and it doesn't take up any additional space. So we can create a full writable copy of a database. It'll be thinly created, meaning it'll take literally megabytes of space, and it can be done within a matter of minutes. And so that gives the DBA a lot of power to be able to surgically do these kind of repairs if they need to. And it's actually, from a practical perspective, a lot more realistic than a desire to be able to do a in-place table recovery.
Excellent. Jeremy, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for answering those questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And it's wonderful to hear, to see all of you participating and wanting to learn more about databases.
Our final topic for today's event is transforming legacy data centers with hyperconverged infrastructure. It's time to rethink IT. In this session, we're going to discuss transforming legacy data centers with hyperconverged infrastructure. We'll start with a definition of what we mean by hyperconverged infrastructure. There's some disagreement on this, but it's actually a pretty well understood term, and we're going to make sure you understand it by the end of this session. We'll talk about the role of the hypervisor in a modern data center environment. The hypervisor remains a critical component in every data center just about, and especially in a hyperconverged one. We'll then move on to talk about why hyperconvergence is just the beginning of a platform-based approach to IT. The platform is what we've been talking about throughout today's event. And by the end of this session, you'll understand hyperconvergence's place in a platform approach to information technology. And we'll wrap up with a discussion about how hyperconvergence becomes the cornerstone for the digitally transformed enterprise. So what is hyperconverged infrastructure? In its simplest terms, HCI brings together a number of data center elements, specifically compute, storage, and a hypervisor. Now, that's at its most basic. Hyperconvergence also brings together networking and other components, security and other components, and it does so in a way that's invisible to the administrator. You basically plug it in, turn it on, and go on your merry way. Essentially, when you're done deploying your first hyperconverged infrastructure stack, you get a simple cluster of similar appliances. And if you need more of a specific resource, if you need more storage, or you need more compute, or you need more RAM, you simply add appliances and then move on. Hyperconvergence is what's known as a scale-out architecture. So as you add compute, you also add more storage, you also add more RAM, and you also add more hypervisor capability. So as you scale linearly, all of these resources scale with you. So you have some expectation of what's going to happen as you add more appliances, and it's a great way to grow an environment. Hyperconvergence is a software-defined approach to previously complex resources. Now, there are hardware appliances in the hyperconverged world, and there are software appliances in the hyperconverged world. You can buy either one, and they both work very, very well. I want to talk about the hypervisor for a minute because it's really a critical component in a hyperconverged world. You know, the hypervisor is the abstraction layer that enables the virtualized data center, and it has been for 20 years, and it will continue to be for the next however many years. The hypervisor is a critical component. It's really a differentiator in hyperconverged infrastructure approaches. There are different ways to attack the hypervisor in the hyperconverged world. Different hyperconverged vendors enable different hypervisor selections. Now, today we're talking about Nutanix. Nutanix can run multiple hypervisors, but they also provide their own called AHV. And it's a fully feature-complete hypervisor that competes with anything else on the market, but also, when you use it, enables a number of other Nutanix capabilities that we'll talk about towards the end of this presentation. Hypervisor choice is a reality in the modern data center, as I just mentioned, and you may want to be able to choose a different hypervisor if you have a specific need or a specific application that requires it. So do your homework and select the hypervisor that best meets your current needs, as well as those in your next generation data center platform. Hyperconverged infrastructure is the very core of a platform approach to IT. That little dot on your screen is a hyperconverged infrastructure cluster. It's 3 or 4 or 10 or 20 nodes that provide compute, memory, storage, networking, whatever you need to make everything work, and the hypervisor stack. Surrounding that, we have virtualized applications, or running up top that, we have virtualized applications and workloads, including virtual machines, databases, end-user computing workspaces, artificial intelligence and machine learning workloads, containers, and other storage devices. So that all runs on top of that hyperconverged core that's at the very center of your new platform. Surrounding that, making sure we take the right approach, we have security, networking, data protection, disaster recovery, everything a modern workload needs in order to be able to operate and be dependent upon for enterprise class capabilities. And then we can't forget about cloud. So in the right platform, we have deep cloud capabilities. We can have cloud integration, and in some cases, we can actually wrangle the cloud. We can bring cloud management and cloud cost control right in to the hyperconverged infrastructure core that we're operating, or the same environment. And wrapping it all together is a comprehensive management platform that manages every aspect of the environment in a single console or a very few consoles. So rather than having consoles sprawl by having all these components distributed and separate, we can have fewer consoles, including managing cloud resources in a hyperconverged infrastructure environment. Again, all of this is built atop that core of the hyperconverged infrastructure platform, and that brings a platform approach to IT that allows you to run many other workloads with ease. Hyperconverged infrastructure and digital transformation were made for one another. The invisible infrastructure approach and hyperconverged infrastructure from core to edge to cloud is exactly what we want in the digitally transformed enterprise. We don't want to think about infrastructure unless we have to. And what I mean by that is only when we have to scale or we have to do something different do we want to think about infrastructure. For our normal operations and to undertake our process to reinvigorate the customer experience, we don't want to have to worry about what kind of storage we're using or what hypervisor we're using or if we have enough compute or RAM or any of that nonsense. We just want things to work. And we also want them to be integrated with the cloud. Because as we think about digitally transforming our processes, cloud plays a huge role, particularly when we have to scale beyond a geographic area or into anything beyond a reasonable limit. Cloud becomes a key player in that kind of deployment. And hyperconverged infrastructure at the core, integrated with the cloud, makes that happen. Again, we want to be able to seamlessly scale on-premises and into the cloud. And we want support for a variety of workload types. So we have to run our standard virtualized and applications, but we also have to think about containers. But when we think about this in the context of the workload, our legacy applications are typically those ones that are virtualized. So we took Microsoft Exchange or we took SQL Server and we run them in virtual machines, and that's great. And we can use those even as we move into the future with a digitally transformed enterprise. But we also want to have the capability to deploy modern distributed container-based applications that may span environments. And this may mean that you have an application that starts out in the data center but has public cloud components as well as edge components all running in Kubernetes or what have you. And we want to make sure we have a platform that can enable all of that to happen? Because when we think about digital transformation, we're thinking about new application development. And modern application development happens with a lot of container approaches and microservices type approaches that don't necessarily use the big virtual machines that old applications used to use, the monolithic applications we used to operate. So when we start to think about hyperconverged infrastructure in the context of digital transformation, we have to make sure that we have a platform that can run virtualized workloads, that can run containers, and run what we need to be able to move forward into the future and move our organizations from the legacy mindset that they've had for so long into one that's more transformative. And the reason for all this is because we want to laser focus on the customer experience. By deploying a platform-based approach based on hyperconverged infrastructure, we're not thinking as much about the technology. We're thinking about what the outcomes we're trying to achieve are, and the inputs don't necessarily matter as much. They're important, don't get me wrong. You're always going to have enough compute. You're always going to have enough storage. There'll have to be some thought that goes into that. But from a development standpoint, we have the capability to deploy a fabric that just works across on-premises, in the cloud, and across the edge. And with the right approach, we get a full suite of enterprise availability and data protection services. And this is really key when we start thinking about digital transformation, really any workload. But more importantly, as we try to transform the customer experience, if we can't maintain their data or we don't have availability so that they can't complete a transaction, we have a serious problem. So these are things we have to have first and foremost on our mind when we think about the digitally transformed enterprise. And thank you very much for listening to this session.
I welcome Steve Poitras, Chief Architect, Nutanix Digital, to the stage.
Hey everyone, Steve Poitras here, Chief Architect of Nutanix Digital. And today what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit about what we're doing in regards to HCI and how it's applicable to these times that we're living in. And then we're actually going to take a little bit of a demo and see kind of some of these things in action. So with that, let's get started. Now, when I think about kind of this time that we're living in today, where we're all decentralized, working from home primarily, potential impacts on the supply chain, it's kind of uncertain times. There's a few core things that, I think are very, very important that we keep in mind here. And the first is, how do we do more with existing, right? So if we think about what we're dealing with today, we may not have the ability to go to the data center or co-location facility, get that new hardware and go deploy, rack stack, cable it, and get it up and running. We may have to deal with what we have. So how can we actually get more benefit from what we currently have running in our co-location or data center facilities? And that's where we're doing a few things. Obviously, we continually try to optimize and make the AOS core much more efficient. And I'll talk about a few core kind of things on the IO path side of things that we're actually doing, which allow to, actually provide much better performance. And that also benefits with much lower CPU utilization. When we free up those CPU cycles, we can then use those for other workloads running on the platform. And if we think about that, that allows us to potentially have further density. So we can run more on what we currently have. Now, the other piece or aspect with that is all about services. So, obviously one of the key things for Nutanix is realistically, it's not just a distributed storage platform or a hypervisor. From my perspective, it's a platform. Right? We try to constantly expand where this platform is running, whether it's on-prem, on AHV and ESXi, what be it. But we also try to constantly expand the platform services. So with things like files and objects, you don't have to deploy additional virtual machines. You can just consume a native service. And this is an important thing when we start thinking about density, because rather than having to deploy additional workloads to handle some of these features like file services or object services, we can now just leverage a service which is built into the Nutanix platform. So that makes things much more efficient and also keeps things much simpler. Now, there are scenarios where we may be running at capacity. Now, what can we actually do, right? We have demand which is static or increasing. Obviously, it's probably not going to decrease anytime soon. And we're faced with these potential supply chain issues, or if we can't get into the co-location facility, if we have resourcing constraints. And that's where a new feature or capability called Nutanix clusters in AWS, from my perspective, really comes into play. Essentially, what this allows you to do is run Nutanix software on bare metal compute from AWS and leverage that just like a Nutanix cluster. The nice thing with this is, at the end of the day, you just manage it like a Nutanix environment. You can have these resources up and running in less than an hour, and your management, your operations, all those capabilities don't change. You can leverage disaster recovery, replication, what be it, it really makes things simple and easy to do. And that's where Nutanix clusters is a very, very cool feature, which we're coming out with, and we'll actually take a look at what this looks like in action. When it comes to, the benefit of today, if I'm facing those capacity constraints, I can just spin up another Nutanix cluster in AWS very rapidly and have that capacity right there ready to go. So very, very powerful when we think about on-demand or burst capacity. And then the last piece there is obviously with everyone working from home, it's even more important that all these services remain up and available, right? And that really comes down to both from a data standpoint as well as from a service continuity point of view as well. Things like VDI, things like file services, things like telecommunications, these things have to be up and running to ensure that business continues to operate as usual. So that's where one of the things I'll be talking about is our AHV synchronous replication feature, as well as metro clustering, which really allows you to provide a near zero RPO. So really protecting that data with a very, very minimal RTO. Really focused on providing the best possible guarantees when it comes to data protection as well as service continuity. Now to the second point about what can we do when we need additional capacity. And that's where Nutanix clusters in AWS really is a very powerful capability and feature. Essentially, what it allows us to do is run Nutanix software on bare metal instances or bare metal compute in AWS. The nice benefit with this is it's all on-demand capacity. So I don't have to wait for procurement cycles. I don't have to go through long, quoting or things like that. Essentially, I can get these instances on demand, apply a Nutanix node license to that, and then in a matter of tens of minutes to an hour, I'm up and running with that additional capacity. The nice benefit is if we think about the times we're in, we may not be able to go to a co-location facility or a data center, or even do some of our sourcing for certain products. So with this, it really gives us that flexibility to consume things without actually ever having to touch the gear. Essentially, all we do is we just apply the license and we're up and running, which is a very powerful thing. The other thing is for temporary capacity, we can spin this up, and when we're done with it, we can just turn it off. And there's a few cool features when we think about hibernation or data persistence there. So very, very powerful when it comes to some of the key benefits to cloud, which is on-demand capacity, but you just pay for what you need. The other key benefit to this is because it is Nutanix on both ends of the spectrum, I manage it just like I would a traditional Nutanix cluster. It just happens to be running out in AWS. So from a operations point of view, I don't actually have to change anything. I know how I manage and operate my Nutanix on-prem environment. Essentially, that carries over to running out in AWS. So with that, we're actually going to hop over to a demo, and I'll actually show you Nutanix clusters in AWS in action. Okay, so here we are in our Nutanix clusters management and provisioning portal. As you can tell, I currently have one cluster which I've deployed to the Northern Virginia AWS availability zone. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to walk through how to create and add a new cluster. So I click here on Add Cluster. This is going to bring up the little menu here where I input the cluster details. So let's just call this TD2. And cloud provider, obviously, at this point is limited to AWS only. We'll select our region, which in this case will be Northern Virginia. And we can either leverage an existing VPC and subnet, or we can go ahead and create new. So in this case, I'm going to create a new VPC. Let's just set the CIDR to 10.10.0.0/16. And then I'll select the AZ, and we'll just do this in 1B. After I've done that, I'll go ahead and click next. The next piece here is we'll go ahead and specify our AOS version and our replication factor. In this case, by default, it's just a single node cluster. So here we actually want to leverage replication factor 2, and we see an alert here saying that we need to have more than one node. So here we'll actually just go ahead and create a 5-node Nutanix cluster, and we can also specify the host type. So by default, obviously, i3 Metal is the main storage-heavy bare metal compute instance from Amazon. However, we do have support, and this will vary based upon, obviously, the region availability zone, as well as future AWS bare metal compute availabilities. So one of the nice things here is obviously I can specify a single node, 3 nodes, 5 nodes. Realistically, there's no limit, right? And so the biggest thing here is based upon the capacity you actually require. I can specify how many nodes I want, of how many, what type. If I want to scale this cluster out in the future, it's just as simple as doing your traditional Nutanix expand cluster. So very, very powerful and intuitive. And in this case, we're going to go ahead and leverage one of my existing SSH keys. Now, whether or not I want to manage this from the public internet, in most cases, this is something that you would not want to allow. In a common scenario, you would want to leverage something like Direct Connect or VPN, basically extending your corporate WAN out into AWS's VPCs. Obviously, you need to have security considerations and all those sorts of things when you take this into account as well. But in most cases, it is absolutely recommended to not have this publicly accessible and just leverage private VPC subnets, and then leverage either a VPN or DC or direct connectivity to your existing WAN. Now, one of the other things is you can also specify account termination. So this will actually deprovision these resources at a certain time. In most cases, if we're running production workloads, we would want to keep these things up and running. So we would select do not terminate, which would just keep things up and running until they were manually deconstructed or deprovisioned. One of the other nice things here too is if we think about the actual visibility in terms of utilization of these resources, obviously Beam is a very, very big part of that. So with Beam, we can actually get that visibility, and we can see that not only have new resources been provisioned, we can see the utilization of those resources. We can also see if there are unused or sunk resources. So really allowing me to get that full optimization on the financial side from my cloud spend. So that looks good. So we'll go ahead and click next. Next thing we'll do, it'll actually show us a summary. This all looks good. And so we will go ahead and click on create, which will then show me that it is now provisioning the cluster. So once that's been provisioned, if I want to hop over to one of my existing clusters here, this is one that I provisioned earlier. And the key difference here is, all you see is just the model is AWS. Other than that, it's the same Prism experience that you're used to traditionally. If you want to register this to Prism Central, you could do that. You could also, leverage replication between these environments. And that's a very powerful thing when you think about this at the end of the day. It's just like another Nutanix environment. It just happens to be running in AWS. So again, very, very exciting stuff coming with this. Very powerful. Definitely a lot of cool stuff going on here. So stay tuned for more. Now, one of the last things there was really focused around ensuring business continuity. Now, when we think about this, this is ensuring that services, capabilities, and anything that our business relies on stays up and available. Now, the best way to do this is typically to build this into your service architecture. So, have a service which is distributed across multiple sites or environments. That way, if one goes down, the service remains up and available. However, that's not always possible when we're dealing with non cloud native applications. So, for those non cloud native applications, when we think about how we actually provide service continuity, there's a few core things. So, obviously, we have your traditional asynchronous snapshots via a product called TimeStream. For remote availability, we can then leverage remote replication for this. Now, with this, this actually allows me to have, your typical asynchronous replication, whether it's hourly. We also have the ability to do this down to a near synchronous level. So this is down to the matter of minutes. We also have something which we call synchronous replication, which is an RPO of near zero. And that really enables a feature called metro availability. Now, the difference between metro availability and your typical disaster recovery is rather than being a DR event, which typically has a much higher RTO and much higher RPO, with metro availability built on synchronous replication, we can have an RPO of zero or as close to zero as possible with the availability ensured via an HA event. So rather than having to go through a DR runbook or anything like that, we can just restart these VMs automatically. So a very, very powerful thing. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this in action. So here we have two Nutanix Prism Central instances. The first one on the left is called Castle Black, and the second one on the right is called Winterfell. So these are two separate PCs, each managing their own Nutanix clusters and environments. Now, what we're going to be showing today is Nutanix Synchronous Replication, or AHV Sync Rep, which is built for AHV. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and click on protection policies. So we'll go ahead and select that. And here you can see I have two protection policies. One using just typical asynchronous replication, but the second here is called synchronous protect. And here I can see I'm actually protecting from my local AZ, so essentially the environment managed by this PC domain. And I'm replicating to this Winterfell Prism Central over here on the right. Now, one of the key things is rather than your typical 1 day, 1 hour, 1 minute RPO, whether you're using asynchronous or near synchronous replication, you can actually see here this is using purely synchronous rep. So what this means is this is actually going to give us an RPO 0, which is a very nice thing because if you think about failure domains typically consist of a node, a block, a rack. In this case, it's a whole Nutanix cluster or data center. So essentially, as writes come into virtual machines protected by this policy, we'll obviously do the synchronous replication within the Nutanix cluster itself, obviously to facilitate node, block, or rack level failures, but we'll also replicate across to another target Nutanix cluster, giving us the full ability to have zero data loss, hence that RPO 0, in the event a Nutanix cluster or availability zone goes completely down. So obviously to create one of these, we would just go to create protection policy. And obviously all the inputs are all the exact same. The only thing that changes here is the policy type. Instead of being asynchronous, which is what we would use for your typical async or near sync, there's just another option for synchronous replication, which we've selected for that other policy. Now, if we go to our virtual machines, we can see we have this two Rajiv VMs here. And if we go ahead and click on this Rajiv Gaming 1 VM, and then click down to recovery points, we can actually see this is protected by that synchronous protect policy with a protection status of synced. So essentially what this means is all writes are being synchronized local to the cluster as well as to the target environment with an RPO of synchronous. Now let's go ahead and go back here. So we can see we have these two virtual machines protected by the same policy. If we go over to our Winterfell cluster, we can see that it's actually having 0 virtual machines matching this Rajiv name criteria. So for this virtual machine, we can see that it has the IP address of 10.40.83.253. So let's remember that. And I actually have a remote desktop session to this virtual machine. So you can see here 10.40.83.253. Now, one of the nice things that synchronous replication for AHV gives us is not only the ability to have a true RPO0 and that data protection guarantee, it also enables some very interesting features like cross-cluster live migration. And one of the benefits of cross-cluster live migration is there's zero downtime to the applications, to the operating systems, to the virtual machines or workloads actually running on the environments. So here we can actually shift a workload from one cluster to another with zero impact to the applications actually running on that. So here I actually have a game which I can interact with here. And obviously this is a live remote desktop session. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to live migrate this over to our target environment. So to do that, we just select this Rajiv Gaming 1 virtual machine. In our actions menu, we select the migrate option here. Let's go ahead and click on that. And this will bring up the migrate dialog box. Now, as you can see, obviously we do network mapping, which is inherited by the recovery plan. And you'll see this checkbox for live migration is checked. So essentially it knows that it is a synchronous protected virtual machine. So in that case, we can actually do a pure live migration. So that looks good. So let's go ahead and click on migrate. So while that's occurring, let's go ahead and interact with this virtual machine. As you can see, I can still actually play this game. For those unaware, this is actually a game called WebScale Joe, which was developed by a few of our rock stars probably about 6 or 7 years ago. So some pretty cool stuff. But as you can tell, I'm able to play the game. Let's see if I actually die or not. So far, so good. And what you're going to be seeing is what we'll do is we obviously already have the data synced via synchronous replication. What we'll do on the back end is then sync the memory state between these two source and target virtual machines. Then once that memory state is in sync, then we can actually perform the cutover. So as you can see here, I've been interacting with this virtual machine. We can now see that Rajiv Gaming 1 virtual machine now is not registered on our Castle Black PC or that cluster, but is now running on our Winterfell AZ in a different cluster as part of that. And that's one of the nice benefits that synchronous protection, synchronous replication, and cross-cluster live migration provides us, is that ability to get that RPO0 across Nutanix environments, but also enables things like that cross-cluster live migration. So that wraps up this section. Thank you very much.
We've had a number of questions come in after Steve Poitras' presentation, so he's going to take a few of them now.
Okay, I'm going to read the question and then I will answer. You mentioned SPDK and block store runs in user space. Aren't there performance issues with running there instead of the kernel? Yeah, so this is definitely something that we get questioned on very frequently, right? A lot of people have this whole kind of idea that everything running in the kernel is much more efficient, and thus, if you want high performance, everything should run there. Realistically, in most cases, the opposite is actually true. A few great examples of this are actually the Intel SPDK and DPDK projects, which were essentially created by Intel or founded by Intel, solely focused on maximizing performance in I/O with high performance NICs, aka the DPDK project, as well as storage media, so NVMe, Optane, 3D Crosspoint, those sorts of things. And the thing with those projects is actually everything moves out of the kernel into user space and leverages polling instead of interrupts. And so that's one of the big trends that we've seen. And, Block Store is kind of an example of this, where we've moved from using EXT in the kernel to writing our own block management layer in user space. And obviously we've seen massive performance improvements, as you could tell there, as well as much lower latency. And so I think you'll start to see a lot of things start moving out of the kernel into user space as media and networks become faster and faster. Okay, next question. Can you talk a little more about clusters in AWS and how you think it will help IT short and medium term? Yeah, so from my perspective, personally, I'm actually very excited about clusters in AWS and clusters in general and the future that it provides. And it's really kind of focused on a few core areas. So one of the big benefits of cloud is I can have on-demand capacity as much as I want whenever I want it, and when I don't need it, I can spin it down. So that's one area where if I have, massive deployments or seasonal workloads where I need to quickly, burst out, quote unquote, that's a perfect example where clusters could be used. So I can, spin those Nutanix clusters in AWS up, run my workload on them, and then if I'm, done or that seasonal burst of traffic is actually gone, I can actually deprovision, decommission, and spin those down. So it actually, enables me to have much more efficient capacity management on premise with the ability to burst out to cloud, which is kind of one of the big benefits to cloud in general. I think the other benefit from my standpoint is, when we think about kind of what people are trying to do with cloud, and I actually, that was one of my first things out of school is I started working on in AWS and EC2 for one of these R&D groups. And so, I've been using it for over 12 years now. The big kind of misconception is that, cloud will be cheap, quote unquote. But at the end of the day, actually, if you actually just bulk lift and shift workloads over to, AWS or any cloud provider and start looking at the bills as they add up, just because you get billed monthly, they may seem smaller month to month, but if you look at them in aggregate, in some cases, they can be substantially more than if you were to build things out on-prem. And obviously, there's a whole lot of stuff to get in on the TCO side of things when it comes to people and all that sort of stuff. But just looking at things from a pure financial perspective, there's a lot of misconceptions there. So that's one thing where I think clusters is very important because it kind of one allows you to take advantage of cloud, so you get that burst capacity. You're not locked in there though, and that's a very key thing, because if I need to burst something out temporarily, or if I want to migrate something out there for a short period of time and then migrate things back, clusters enables me to do that. It's just like moving data or virtual machines across two different Nutanix environments. The other thing there is it gives me, number one, kind of that mobility that I just kind of alluded to. If we think about how people were to migrate to cloud, a lot of times it's either I need to re-architect my applications, go through a migration and cut over, which is a very exhaustive process, a very expensive process. The other thing that people don't think about is once I've gone through that process, essentially I've re-architected my app to run on AWS services. If I want to migrate that to Azure or GCP, I have to go through that full process again. I have to re-architect my app and then do the migration, all that sort of stuff. So, you really kind of don't have mobility if you re-architect in that sense, just because you have to re-architect every single time you want to migrate to a different platform. One of the nice benefits that Nutanix Clusters provides is you don't have to re-architect anything. So I can take my existing, VM or container, workloads, the services, whether they're using Calm or not, and actually just migrate them. I can use, native disaster recovery and replication to replicate up into AWS. I can even use synchronous replication and, cross-cluster live migration, assuming that latency is not an issue. So some very powerful things you can actually do there. When it comes to mobility of workloads across different cloud and on-prem environments. So yeah, I think in general, there's a lot of future potential for this. One, from the mobility aspect, two, from the burstability and scalability point of view. But three, mainly just due to the fact that it really kind of lowers and reduces that, activation energy to get things out into the cloud. Our whole idea at the end of the day is, we want to be a platform that spans both on-prem, whatever hypervisor, as well as whatever cloud provider. And we want to be that conduit that kind of connects all. So there's a lot of good stuff coming there, and a lot of future potential.